there's so much going on in the world. There's so much going on in Mississippi. I've talked to a lot of folks who, frankly, they know the election's coming up, but they don't know who's running. They don't know when the primary is. They don't know when the general election is. So I'm wanting to do everything we can to just talk about the important issues and raise awareness about the election, because I think it's an important election.
It is. So thanks for bringing that up. Thanks for bringing that up, because our country is at its best when people are participating in the process.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. So to answer your question, June 7th is the primary.
Mm-hmm.
June 7th is the election. People need to get out and vote. I'm asking people to get out and vote June 7th. And you're right. I've heard that too. Oh, we didn't know there was an election. But there is. June 7th is the primary. And in Mississippi, with the congressional side of it and the way the districts shape up, the winner of the Republican primary is the odds-on favorite, to say the least, to win the election in November. Mm-hmm. And there are, in this race, there are a number of Republican candidates, there are 2 Democrat candidates, and there are 2 independents. So there are multiple people on the ballot, and so this is going to go through November. Also, it's the most competitive congressional race in Mississippi, and there's reasons for that. I mean, the way things tend to shape up is if people are happy with what's going on with your with the incumbent, then people aren't running against them. Or another way to put it is elections or re-elections are referendums on the incumbency. And right now you have multiple people in this congressional race, and I would submit that they're not happy. Mm-hmm. And so it's extremely important for people to get out there and vote.
No doubt. And you know, I think, like as you mentioned, there's a lot of people who are unhappy. Congress as a whole has a failing grade, a low approval rating across the board every time they do the poll. So it's interesting.
Can I interrupt you there?
Go ahead, yeah.
I can tell you anecdotally, that's what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, across the board, and I've been from Laurel to Summerall to Picayune to Gulfport, that is what I'm hearing. Nobody has trust in or believes in Congress, and they have reasons for that. And so that's why you're seeing it, but also that's why, as voters, we need to be willing to make a change, if you will, and vote for someone that's going to be able to do the job and have their interests at heart. But I'm hearing that on the ground, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, well, I think that's a good way to lead into my first question, which is really about corruption. Right. There has been, I forgot the congressman, the candidate's name. He's running for Senate, I believe, current congressman. He talked about the other day this pay-for-play program, basically, that happens where, and I'm not certain of all the specifics, but basically in order to get a committee assignment, you have to pay a certain amount to the party in charge or what have you, and that basically that it would be the lobbyists that flip the bill. And, of course, if they flip the bill, you better play right with whatever they're doing. So I think that's just one example of corruption that just runs rampant up there. And I think that regardless of what side of the aisle our elected officials are on, that's something that everybody is concerned about. So can you speak to what can be done?
Boy, can I speak to it. That is the reason I'm in this race, Jay. I am sick and tired of the corruption and the self-dealing going on in D.C.
Good.
And I'm not familiar with the specific case that you're talking about, but we consistently see those corruption members of Congress being either resigning or having to do that. And it is no secret, the current incumbent for the 4th District of Mississippi has ethics violations. That's a fact. That's not something that I'm saying. That's not something that anybody else is making up. That's a fact. Mm-hmm. And people are sick and tired of it. I'm sick and tired of it. And as you know, I came, before I entered the Senate, I was a prosecutor in the district attorney's office for Jackson, Georgia, and Greene County. I've spent my life prosecuting. And this is the mentality that I'm bringing to Congress, because I brought it with me to the state Senate. As an example, in the wake of the DMR scandal, for those that don't know, the Department of Marine Resources had a scandal, and the former director went to prison on it. I was chairman of Marine Resources. I filed what became known as the DMR Accountability and Transparency Act, where we made things required, and we cleaned that up. And for everything that I know to this day, DMR is running fine. In the wake of the Singing River Hospital debacle, which was right here in my back door, in my backyard, I filed legislation to make it transparent about which is what led to the hospital situation and the pensioners losing their life savings. And during that time, Shay, I literally had people tell me, you will never be in politics again if you do this.
Wow.
And by the way, I have some of the messages still. They said, you will never be there. Well, I said, that's not why I'm in the legislature. I'm here to do the right thing, and this is the right thing. And so working with Lieutenant Governor Reeves at the time and my colleagues, we got it passed. And I took on during that time the hospital special interest. They still don't like me for that. I can tell you it has a flare up every now and then.
Yeah.
And because I stood my ground and did what was right. And the corruption has got to go away. This is why people are distrustful of our politicians in Congress, because they're out of touch. And we have to get back to people that they trust. This is to be an effective, honestly, country. You have to have what I would call a working relationship between those that are elected, the elected officials, and those that they serve. And speaking of that, on my website, and I encourage everybody to go to my website, bricewiggins.ms. There's at a prominent place right up there at the top, it says servant leadership, and I talk about servant leadership. And what I talk about is us elected officials putting the citizens that we represent above us. And who is the greatest servant we ever had? Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ put his life on the line so that we had salvation. I'm not saying I'm Jesus Christ. Please don't confuse that.
Yeah.
My point is, it's knowing what is the right thing to do. And so the corruption side of this, that's what's fueling me. I refuse to go away. I've taken my prosecutor mind from the courtroom and put it into the legislative branch, and I've been successful on that.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I think that's you hit on one thing that is going to lead me into my next question: being out of touch. I don't have to tell you. I mean, the cannabis issue is a big thing that we fought for in Mississippi. So my question is less about Mississippi's role and more about the federal government's role. You voted for the program, which I appreciate. Mississippi has a cannabis program. There's a lot of states that have various cannabis program, whether it be recreational or medical. From my perspective, the 10th Amendment is pretty clear. We need to, as much as possible, let states have as much authority and autonomy as we can. There was recently a bill in the Congress that would go towards legalizing all marijuana at the federal level. I'm not certain of all the specifics of that, so you may have more information. But just talk to me about the federal government's role in marijuana and just the 10th Amendment in general.
Yeah. So to your point about where Mississippi is, look, if you asked me 6 years ago, would Mississippi have a marijuana program, I would have told you no.
I would have been there too.
Okay. And it has moved fast. But it's our job as elected officials, particularly in the legislative branch, which is supposed to be the voice of the people, to listen to the folks. And so 6 years, it's moved so fast. And you know the statistics probably better than I do, but 33 states have some type of medical marijuana program. I think almost 20 have gone to a recreational program, okay? And guess what? Those programs in each of those states differ, okay? What goes on in California is different from Utah. And actually, when the legislature, and particularly the Senate, was looking at the medical marijuana program after the Supreme Court, and we can talk about that, about checks and balances, but after the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional, we took up hearings, and we heard from the foremost legislators and experts in places like Michigan, California, Oklahoma, and a number of other places, and each of their programs differed because we wanted to find out what was working and what was not. And you know what this goes back to? It goes back to states are the laboratories of democracy.
Yes.
Let the states do it. And we have too much regulation, too much government overreach. And so I understand the discussion about the war on drugs and marijuana and all that. Look, I prosecuted. I put people in prison, okay, for different crimes and for felony crimes and all that. And we don't want people standing out on the corner, being dope heads the whole time, okay? But the states are speaking, and Mississippi spoke. 70%, more than 70% of the voters on Initiative 65 passed it. And my point is, if we're not listening to the people, then that's wrong. And so Congress being out of touch, it's an example of Congress being out of touch. Yep. And here's even more of a policy issue on that. Because the states are operating with 33 different laws and all that. By the way, that's how our founders set it up. Yeah. The feds, because they haven't done anything on the marijuana program, it has put banks and it's put legitimate business owners in purgatory, to say the least. There is money flowing everywhere outside of the normal regulatory scheme. Right. And it's causing problems. And it causes problems for our law enforcement.
Yes.
Because the feds have put law enforcement in an untenable position. And I don't blame law enforcement. I blame Congress and feds for not trying to address it and not getting the job done. And what I mean by that is they have to choose how to enforce the law. And you got a different set for the feds and you got a different set of states. Mm-hmm. And so it's also caused problems on the banking side. And so from a congressional standpoint, what more does it take for you to address the issue and make it, if nothing else, easier on our law enforcement folks? Okay. Right. So we have to be listening, and I think that needs to happen. And so back to your point about the 10th Amendment, mm-hmm. Those things should be left to the states, particularly in where you're seeing 33 different states have 33 different laws. And let me say this, many people may not know this, but the U.S. Supreme Court, and we're sitting here in my law office, when they take up a case to decide one of their dictates, they don't have to take up every case. In fact, they don't. One of their dictates is they want to resolve conflicting laws across the country, okay? Right. So it's called cert, granting cert, all right? And so our country is about having different laws, but they want to create some understanding. And so my point about that is that we need to let the states do their business, and the feds through Congress doesn't need to interfere. We need to be pro-law enforcement, which we are, but we have to be listening and not out of touch. And I think what you're seeing is Congress being out of touch at a minimum by not even addressing the banking issue.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect example of even if you want to have some sort of federal say, which I disagree, the banking issue is one of those perfect examples of the federal government's overreach is causing this purgatory, this kind of gray area where honest businesses, honest people who are just trying to take advantage of a state program are kind of being caught up in this. Even if the federal government isn't going to enforce it, it still creates anxiety. It creates a lot of unnecessary conflict.
And let me say that about that. Look, one of our jobs, in my opinion, as a member of the legislative branch is to actually listen, not dictate, but listen. Okay. And again, 6 years ago, I didn't know the legitimacy of the marijuana business. Yep. Okay. But I will tell you, with what happened, I learned about the legitimacy, how much money is in the banking, where things have gone. Right. And there are, not only do you have people who need it for medical purposes, but there is a legitimate business side that people have done that. Yeah. So that's why I think you saw the Mississippi legislature enact the program that we did, because we started to realize where the people were coming from. And actually, you probably know this, but when it first started, the advocates, if you will, for the marijuana industry and the medical marijuana, they weren't happy with the Mississippi legislature, right? Is that right?
That's right.
Okay,
That's right.
weren't happy. And I think you and I had some conversations. But what I heard when it was all said and done, that people were actually appreciative of what we did because we actually listened and worked with them.
Yep.
And that is that.
Yeah, no, that's fair, and certainly, you know, it's everything I wanted wasn't in, and everything you wanted was not. It wasn't a perfect bill, but I did really feel, now some more than others, but I felt like most of the folks up there were willing to sit down and hear from their constituents, hear from the people in the industry, and I do appreciate that.
And that's my point, Shay, is you don't get that from Congress.
Right.
At least I haven't seen it. That's why I'm running, because I want to bring what we do in Mississippi from that standpoint to D.C. because people deserve it.
Yeah.
And that as a legislator, so to the point about where we were 6 years ago to now, that's how it should work. And so we have too much government overreach. We have too much regulation. Let me say this to get into the
because this is a good segue into where we're going.
Yeah, the Dobbs case, if you look at, which is the Roe v. Wade case coming out of Mississippi, in the bottom line is the argument being made to the Supreme Court by the state of Mississippi is let the states decide. Okay, that's it. Let the states decide the 10th Amendment. Okay, you know, and if that prevails, California may want to ban it, and California may want to ban it, and Mississippi may want to ban it, and California,
or theoretically, if that's the other way.
Yeah, you know, so, and I've already seen other states already kind of implement. My point is, let the states decide, and that goes to your point about the 10th Amendment. Let the state. We don't need all the government regulation.
Exactly. Well, and so that's a perfect segue. So one of the things that we've seen, the CDC. Just made it to where you could not have masks on planes. Now, I guess the Biden administration is talking about suing. I don't know if they really know what day it is half the time, because yesterday he said it was going to be. He started talking about Title 42 and all this stuff. But anyway, so I say all that. How do you feel about, because the CDC, it seems, has overreached. They've and I don't know if it's just the federal government that was just running scared and just willing to let them. Do and impose everything they want. How do you feel about, in general, agencies and departments, being able to make essentially laws and regulations that we must all follow?
Well, first of all, I'm against it. Have you ever heard of what's called the Chevron principle?
I don't know
what that is? Okay, so that's a law that was implemented by the Supreme Court back in the 80s, which said that regulations put out by agencies have the effect of law, basically. And the Supreme Court is recently, led by Chief Justice Roberts, has tried to overturn that, or in the process of overturning that principle. In fact, I think they did in one case. My point is that that's not what agencies should do. We have too much government overreach, okay? Congress is the legislative branch that makes the laws. In Mississippi, the legislature is the legislative branch that makes the laws. It's not the agencies. As I learned in 8th grade civics, the legislature makes the laws, the executive branch enforces the laws, and the judicial branch interprets the laws.
That's what we learned on Schoolhouse Rock, right?
That's what we learned on Schoolhouse Rock. And guess what? If you don't like the law, or if the executive branch is not enforcing it or doing it, or they say they can't, then you go to the legislative branch and you get the law passed. That's how our founders set it up.
Yeah.
And I will say this. I think that over time, Congress has ceded their authority to the agencies way too much. And that's where that Chevron principle has come in. And I have stood up and said that I'm not going to allow that to happen. Everything that I could do, I'm gonna say we need to be there as congressmen and women to make those laws. You send us there to make the hard votes, and I think where that comes from is they don't want to make the hard votes. I don't mind saying immigration. Okay, at the end of the day, guess who sets immigration policy? Congress.
Yep.
Okay, they haven't done it, and yes, President Trump tried to deal with it. Let's be honest. President Biden's tried to deal with it, but you know what? It's Congress, because they will not get in and they will not make the hard decisions. That's right. Because they're scared politically, in my opinion, from what I've seen. And when was the last time the actual law was updated? From what I understand, the 1960s. Okay, and so guess what happens? We're in we have the problem that we have at the southern border. It's about Congress stepping up and doing the job, and you don't see that happening because they shove it off to the agencies, and so the agencies naturally end up making regulations that become law, and we have to change that.
Right. Why do you think that is? I mean, I agree 100% that Congress has kind of just got out the way and don't want to make hard votes. Why do you think that is? Is it more of we just need to elect people who are willing to be in the fire, or is it kind of just a feature of overregulation? And I mean, I don't know what the answer is, but I know they're not doing their job. I know that much.
Well, I would submit we as an electorate need to elect people that are willing to stand up. Just like I go back to my point about the Singing River Hospital. I have people telling me if you do that law or you do that bill, you're never going to be in politics again. I said, I'm sorry if that's how you feel, but that's not why I ran for office. I did it to do the right thing. The people hold us elected officials accountable.
Right.
Okay. And so I think there's partly that. I think it's partly the elected officials in Congress in particular making an effort to be connected with the people and to do that, because that's how the people hold us accountable.
Right.
Yes, there's money in politics, but I can tell you in my instances that I tell people, I said, look, I love, I've got money is a necessary part of the process, but my votes are my votes. I said, I own my votes. I said, I do my own research. I look at my own research.
And that's where transparency comes in.
That's where transparency, right. Nobody's going to tell me, they can ask me to vote a certain way. They can try to persuade me. But at the end of the day, I stand by the votes that I make because I've done the research and I look at it. And one thing that I think that I think people appreciate from my time in the legislature is when I make a vote, I explain where my vote came from. Okay, I know it because I take it that seriously. And your vote in the legislative branch is your currency, if you will. That's what I have. That's the value there. Okay, there's a lot that goes on, but my vote has my name on it and my constituents' names on it at the end of the day. And so they have a right to know how I'm voting. And I think too many times in Congress, people they don't look at it that way. Look, and I stand on my own record, but there's been some articles come out about proxy voting up in Congress. I have, other than when my wife was undergoing breast cancer treatments, I've never missed a vote that I recall.
Well, I think we can forgive you for that. That's
what I would hope. So.
And you're right. I mean, it's one of those where, I remember when I was elected. Sure, I wanted to hear from everybody as far as what they think, and is there something I'm not considering? Let me see it from a different perspective. But at the end of the day, your position as mayor, I didn't get a vote, but I mean, theoretically, I could if I had to break a tie. So, and I appreciate that. One of the subjects I wanted to be sure to talk about is the economy, is spending. From my perspective, I think that the government is just spending way too much money. We see inflation just going through the roof. They're talking about, I think the last numbers I saw was 8 point something. Most people think it's actually higher than that. So how do you feel? I know in 2020 we printed a quarter of the currency that has ever existed of the U.S. dollars, and frankly, it's one of those as Republicans, conservatives, we want to shore up all the spending, but we have to be honest about some of this spending comes from a red stamp of approval. So can you speak to that?
Yeah. So first of all, the fact that we have $3 trillion in debt on the national highest it's ever been. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's crazy. And I'm going to speak from experience here, or at least from being on the front lines. I've been on the appropriations committee since I've been in the legislature. To control spending like that, you have to say no. Right. And believe me, I have said no as an appropriator in the state of Mississippi, and people don't like it. But you know what? You have to. And so what I think The spending is out of control. I hear that from everybody. Okay, I hear that whether I'm in the Republican clubs or I'm in at the Rotary Club. I hear that, and we have to have people that are going to stand up and say no to the out of control spending. All right. And I realize it's not easy, but that's our job. You send us there to do it because it's about the future for our kids. Let me say this, that from the state legislature standpoint, we literally just came out of having the best financial situation that we've had. There's stimulus money and other things. But what people may not realize is for the previous, when I came in, the Democrats had controlled the legislature, okay? And then
what year did you get elected?
So that was I took office in 2012. Okay, and that year the Republicans controlled the House by one vote. We have since gotten a supermajority in the House and the Senate. Okay, over that time, from the spending side of it, we did a number of things. One, we said we're not going to spend one-time money on recurring expenses because that's what was happening, and the state was in debt. Okay,
that's dangerous. That's so dangerous.
Correct. And so then we put money in the rainy day fund. Okay, we filled that up, and believe me, people screamed and yelled, "How dare you do that?" Okay, so we did that. Then fast forward to this year, what were we able to do? We were able to, one, do the highest teacher pay raises in the history of Mississippi. We were able to give the taxpayers the largest tax cut in Mississippi history, and we were able to not take on debt on the state. In other words, we're going to be paying off 2 years worth of debt on that. Why were we able to do that? Because we made these right decisions, because we actually said no. And I've been vice chairman of appropriations, and I can tell you that people don't like to be told no, but that's what has to happen. I'll give you another, for instance, with the ARPA funds, the stimulus money. Yeah. When the Senate did our hearings this past summer, we said we want to hear what your needs are and all that. We had $1.7 billion. That's what we were given under the stimulus funds. When people came in at the end, there was $7 billion in requests. $7 billion. Now, we didn't fund $7 billion in requests. We funded actually probably less than $1.8 billion. But that's what we do in Mississippi. Let me say the other thing. Mississippi, we have to balance the budget. We have to do that. Imagine that. So what does that do? That requires you as appropriators and decision makers to make priorities. And that also means saying no. Up in the federal level in Congress, they don't ever balance the budget. They don't ever do that. That's why I put forward a resolution for a balanced budget amendment in the Constitution. I've asked for that because by doing a balanced budget, you have to make the right decisions and you keep the debt and deficit under control.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Does that make sense?
No, it makes absolute sense, and I think that it's from my perspective, I see it. You hate to call it pet projects, but it's one of these where if the federal government knows that they just have this unlimited supply of money, and they could just, okay, well, you need a pet project, let's fund it. We'll get you in our good graces, and then all of a sudden, all of our dollars is
I'm not going to get into the whole. I know Congress can print their own money and all that kind of stuff, and that
Federal Reserve,
and all that. And right now, that's outside of my bailiwick. Yeah. But I think you can control what you can control, and if you're a member of appropriations or you're in that decision making capacity, you got to be willing to say no. You shouldn't say, "Oh, I always have the ability to print money." I mean, Again, we're in the inflation is I don't even know where the numbers are, but it's like we've never seen it before certainly in our recent lifetime, because you see what inflation is going on. You see high gas prices. You see all of that. I mean, talk about being out of touch. Yeah. But these decisions have an effect, and people and Congress people have to be aware of that.
Well, what could be done as far as is there something that could we talked about transparency and such. I mean, is there anything that could be done to kind of bring some of these decisions out of the dark, or is it just kind of a feature of government that we just have to live with?
That's a good question. So I think a couple things. One, from the elected officials position, and this is what I do. I think we have an obligation to tell the constituents and the public the truth. Okay, I think too many politicians, and I'm being nice here, shade the truth. And let's be real. What you see on social media is what people want you to see. It's not the full truth. Okay, because I know this for a fact. Because when I'm in the middle of the legislature and I see the reports that come out on social media or whatever, and they are like, they're only the tip of the iceberg about what really went on. And then I spend, after the legislative session, because I'm on this tour right now, I go around telling people what actually did happen. And so my point is, we have an obligation to do that as elected officials. I'll say on the other side, as a electorate, I think there is an obligation as a citizen to be aware of what our government is doing and our elected officials.
Right.
I understand that people are busy. They got families, and so they can't pay attention, and they don't know everything that's going on, which is why it's that much more important to choose your elected officials wisely. Who is going to tell you the truth? Because at the end of the day, I think across the board, people want their government to work for them. They want it to be responsive. But so I think shining a light from both sides is very important. I think doing research on the issues that's important. I also think getting involved in the process. I'm going to use an example from my time in the DA's office. So I ran the grand jury within the DA's office for a number of years. Grand jury is where when people get charged with crime, it goes to the grand jury for people to decide. That's preserved in our U.S. and state constitutions. All right, so when you pick a grand jury, it's from 20 members of the community. And they hear all felony cases from across the county. And to a person, in every year I was there, to a person, the grand juror said, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea this went on in my community."
Wow.
But what they also said was, this was the best experience I ever had, because what you had was people, they didn't know about the drug cases or the shootings, but they also didn't know about all this other stuff. They only knew what was in there. And what
was in the headlines?
It wasn't in the headlines, and it's not, because it's confidential.
Yeah.
The point is, they found out what was going in their community. They participated in it by being a grand juror. And look, these grand jurors heard horrendous cases like child sex abuse cases, murder cases. But to a person at the end of the day, they came out and said that was a positive experience because they were participating and they got to see what was going on. And so it's the classic being a part of the being a citizen.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good transition from things in our backyard to things that are not in our backyard, being Ukraine, foreign policy. What's your thoughts? I mean, with Ukraine, it was very interesting because we saw there's conflicts happening all over the world.
Yes.
What Russia did was a bad thing. Putin is definitely a bad actor. The people of Ukraine deserve peace. They deserve a country. Obviously, they don't deserve to be invaded by a foreign country. But unfortunately, what's happening in Ukraine is not necessarily unique around the world. I think that if we're going to talk about getting involved with other countries, I think we need to, or other conflicts, I think we need to make sure that we say, okay, well, what's the principles here? What are our goals? What is the policy of the United States? So I say all that to say that what's your thoughts on foreign policy in general, and what's your thoughts on Ukraine?
Yeah, so there's a couple questions in there, so I want to take.
I threw a lot at you.
Take one by one. So first of all, if you go on my website, bricewiggins.ms, we have quite a few policy videos on our website, and I talk about where I stand on foreign policy. Right. You will see not only our foreign policy position, but you'll see our Second Amendment position, our pro-life position, where we stand on the different things. I think you'll also see that it's on the different issues, there are positions that that are thoughtful and not just knee jerk on that. And I think anybody that knows me knows that I take the job seriously, and I'm going to think those through. And that goes to the point about foreign policy is, I guess the old saying is, what are our strategic interests? Okay, we cannot involve ourselves in every single flare-up that goes around the globe. We can't do that, okay? But what we can be is we can have the strongest military in the world. We can have the strongest Navy in the world. And what was the old, was it Teddy Roosevelt that said, speak softly and carry a big stick?
I love it, yep.
Okay, so speak softly and carry a big stick. Only through the Biden administration and others, our stick has become a twig.
Yeah,
okay, and we need to have a bigger stick. I think under Ronald Reagan we had the stick at its biggest point, but we've now become a twig, and we need to get there. If you have that, then you can speak softly because people respect you, I guess, to that point. And so we can't be involved in every single aspect, and we can do what is in our strategic best interest. As far as Ukraine, it is horrible. It's horrible what's going on, and we have a right. I'm big on honoring our obligations, and as a NATO member, Ukraine's not in NATO; they want to be. We have those obligations to adhere to, and Putin is wrong for what he's doing, to say the least. It's a land grab, power grab, and also he's let me back up. As a child of the '80s, my formative year were in the '80s, and when we saw President Reagan stand before the wall and had the wall come down, there was a reason for that, because of the Reagan strategy in terms of how to deal with foreign dictators, and basically showing a power of strength. Again, speak softly, carry a big stick. And so Putin has seen the weakness that is in the administration. And I will be the first one to say that I don't think under President Trump, our strategy on foreign policy certainly wasn't effective, and it wasn't good. I am not one to cozy up to dictators, okay? Yeah. So I think that I'm also, let me say this, I'm also I think smart enough to know what I don't know. And so going back to what we talked about, listening, I'm willing to listen to the experts. That includes our military and our generals. I'm willing to listen to our state officials. But at the end of the day, the decision making is with Congress. Right. Going back to what we said, Congress is shirking that responsibility, and they won't do it. Okay. Under our Constitution, the Congress is the only one to declare war.
Yes.
Okay. Our founders put that in there for a reason. That's a bright line. Unfortunately, I think that's over time gotten shirked because they allow that to go to the executive branch or whatever, and you see us getting into different things. If Congress was forced to make the decision, then I think you would have better decision making. The problem is those decisions have been taken out of Congress's hand, either intentionally or unintentionally. But it's our role as Congress to make those decisions and be a check on all that.
And I'm glad you said that. That was going to be my next question, because it's the executive branch. Not necessarily, I don't know if incentive, that might be a little too harsh of a word, but whenever war is going on, it's the executive branch is the rock star then, right? I mean, the executive branch, they're the commander in chief. I mean, ideally, I think, it kind of frustrates me, honestly, every 4 years whenever we're talking about the president and people just throw in foreign policy as just yet another issue. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is the commander in chief. If anything, foreign policy should be the number one issue we talk about when we're talking about electing a president, but it's just wrapped up in everything else because, like you said, Congress just cedes all their authority to the executive.
Well, and traditionally, I think that comes in because under our Constitution, the chief executive, who is the president, has wide latitude in that. And traditionally and customarily, Congress has supported that so that we have for lack of a better term, a unified voice. Okay. But we also have a role in the congressional side of things to be a check on that. I mean, ultimately the president can't do anything because Congress is the one that appropriates money. Okay. Right. This goes back to checks and balances. And if we could, I'd like to talk about that, but that's where that goes. And we have to do that. I think there's too much ceding of authority, vice versa. I think there's too many chief executives. And by the way, I'm speaking also from being in the legislature. I think they get frustrated with the legislative branch, but you know what? That's how our founders set it up. Right. And democracy's not pretty, but it works. Mm-hmm. And that's the checks and balances. So on foreign policy, yes, traditionally, the president has had wide latitude in foreign policy, but our founders said it's only Congress that can declare war. Right. And as ends up being so much the case, those lines get muddied, and I'm about bringing those lines back to clear definition under the way our Constitution was set up.
Great. Good.
And if I may talk about that, under the checks and balances, I think that and it's this. I think that people have just by naturally forgotten or don't choose not to understand how our founders set it up. There are 3 co-equal branches of the government: judicial, executive, and legislative, and they each have a defined role, and they each are to serve as a check on the others. What's the old saying? Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's why our founders created the checks and balances and the 3 branches within our Constitution. Yep. And I think too many times people think something that is, I'm going to generalize. Let me say this. People think the president makes the law. The president doesn't make the law, just like the governor doesn't make the law. There's a saying that we had in the legislature. And by the way, Governor Reeves and Governor Bryant, I know they probably heard me say this, but they probably won't like me saying it. So every year in Mississippi, the governor issues his executive budget. Okay, this is what the budget is. And the media goes out and says, the governor said that this budget is what it's going to be. And you would think that that's going to, you know what the legislators say, particularly of those of us on the appropriations? Go put it in the trash can. Yeah. Because you know what? It doesn't have the force of law. Right. Because the legislature in the state of Mississippi is given the authority under the Constitution to set the budget. Mm-hmm. Now, just like anything else, we can look at that and go, hey, that's the governor and he's running that and we respect that and all that. But you know what? It's the legislature that makes that decision. That's right. Okay? And so on the federal level, it's the same thing. People think, oh, well, you know, the president has his legislative agenda. Well, you know what? The president doesn't make the law. Yeah. Congress makes the law. Now, the president can have an agenda, and he can come in, and he or she, when we get a female president, can come in and say, this is what I like to be done, and then Congress can either do it or not do it. And look, we do that on the state level.
Do it at the local level.
You do it at the local level. There you go. So, you know, Governor Bryant and Governor Reeves, who the 2 governors since I've been in the legislature, they have their agenda and they come over and they get a legislator, be it a senator or a House member, to help them. Mm-hmm. This year I helped Attorney General Lynn Fitch, because guess what? As the Attorney General, you don't pass the law, you enforce the law. And I think too many people have forgotten. So from the media standpoint, maybe this goes back to FDR in the first 100 days. For whatever reason, the media has decided to forget that was that's almost 100 years ago or something.
Yeah, almost.
So the president does not make the law. It's Congress. And the media talks about, oh, well, this is Biden's agenda or this is somebody's agenda. Well, that may be their agenda, but it's up to Congress. And I think back to your earlier question about how we as citizens can make it better, we need to understand those. And to that end, that's why for the last 2 years in the state legislature, I filed a bill to require students in the state of Mississippi to be taught what I call the inner workings or the relationship between our branches of government, because they're not getting it. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing it. We're not getting it in our kids, and quite honestly, in in our adults. And again, it goes back to what I said. People are busy. I understand it. But in order for us to get better on all of this, we have to understand how that works.
Yeah, because you're right. I mean, people have lives. They have things they got to do. They're not trying to be an armchair philosopher preach to them about stuff. Right. They just want to make sure that the government can get stuff done.
But as I've seen, and people have lost trust in their government officials, rightfully so. It goes back to your question about corruption. Mm-hmm. We have to hold them accountable, but the officials have broken that trust with the electorate. That's why when I was a prosecutor, one of the absolute fundamental cases that we would always pursue is white collar cases against public officials, because they've broken the public trust. Because if you don't have trust, if you don't have trust in your government, then you descend into chaos and you descend into some of these what you would call banana republics and all that. And if you want to go a little bit further into that, why is America in terms of have the things that we have in terms of economy and in terms of business and all that? Because across the globe, they have faith in our system and our laws and how we do it. The corruption. Talk to somebody who's been in Venezuela about how they do business down there. Okay? We have Chevron right here. I represent Chevron. I talked to the former head of the refinery here, and he told me about how they operated in Venezuela. Let me put it this way. It's corruption everywhere. Okay? And if we don't, and so that's where I'm afraid, Shay, we are descending in through the corruption is how we become a second or third world country. And we're better than that. And in fact, the 4th District of Mississippi is better than that. And we deserve better than that. And I commend everybody that's running in this race. And I think people will see who's the best prepared to hit the ground running. Speaking of that, by all indications, the Republicans are going to take over the House, okay, come the midterm elections. Are we going to be ready to advance the ball on that? And who's ready to advance the ball on that? Who has the ability to do that? And who's not saddled with the corruption that you're talking about? I hope people ask themselves that question.
Yeah, it's an important question to ask. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know there's tons of issues we could talk for hours and hours about, but just sum up. So tell the people where they can find you.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for coming out and doing this. So for us, our website is bricewiggins.ms. Please go vote on June 7th. And let me say this: if you don't think you're going to be there, you can vote absentee. Okay, the absentee ballots, the ballots have already gone to the circuit. I take that back. I think April 20 next week will be when the ballots are in your circuit clerk's office. Okay, and you can go and vote. And in Mississippi, we don't have early voting, but we have absentee voting. Mm-hmm. So for all those who are planning vacations, for all those who are going to be gone, and I understand it, you can still vote absentee. If in Mississippi, if you are out of the state on June 7th, you can vote absentee. And so you can do that, I think, starting May 1st. The ballots you can request next week, and then the ballots are available starting, I think, around May 1st. Okay, to do that. So June 7th is the date. Please go out and vote. We'll be in your neighborhood, out and about, from Laurel to Picayune to Gulfport to here in Jackson County. And check out our website. We're also on social media, Brice Wiggins for Congress. That's another way people can be in touch with us. And we're out. We have different speaking engagements. We have a whole team that's working with us. If somebody wants to have some ideas, reach out to us and we'll get it on the schedule. So, and it is my goal to be meeting with as many people as possible. By the way, not just because it's an election, but that's what I do anyway. And if you go to our website, you go to our social media, I think you'll find that we're out there. And my goal is to let me back up. My goal is to be held accountable by the people, and the only way that happens is by the people connecting with me and telling me and making sure I'm there in front of them. And so I'm happy to do that.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate it. Everybody be sure to go on and check out Senator Wiggins and his campaign.